Q&A. I think Amber's willing to
Oh, I love
take
it.
questions.
Yes.
First of all, I want to say very good. I wanted to know, what really struck me the most is when you said that motivation should be hope and not anger. When you think about how, especially like the queer movement is just so normalized, like, you know, the goal is marriage. And
Right.
like, once we get married, cool, we're done.
Right.
What do you think, I mean, when we propose things that are so different, how do you maintain hope when it seems like, you know, everyone else is here,
Yeah.
but then what you want is on Pluto?
Right. Yeah. That's a challenge. I mean, really, it is very hard. And it's been very disturbing to me to actually watch the kind of more and more conservative normalization of the queer agenda. I work for the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, NGLPF, and God knows they're one of the big marriage queens. They really, you know, it's their big agenda, along with ENDA and a couple of other things. And I had the politics I have now when I joined them. And it wasn't pretty to try and have those kinds of arguments. But one of the things that was interesting to me is that a lot of the people that had that politics had never heard a different argument. They had never thought about marriage as any, I mean, why would you be against it, Amber? You know, why isn't marriage wonderful? Why wouldn't you want it? It's like, I'm not even sure where to start with that conversation. You know what I mean? But it was really interesting to me because people, you know, to make the assumption that people had a history where they had critiqued an institution like marriage, for example, when they'd never thought of it at all. And they really did believe that it was a marker of their civil rights that they couldn't get married. And that was why, and that they wanted it because they couldn't have it. Instead of asking, what do you believe in? And what kind of relationship are you in? And what kind of relationship do you want? And what kind of world are you trying to create? They had never been asked that. They'd been taught how to do a phone bank for legislative reform. They had never read anything that was radical. They had nothing, really, they had no idea. So when I would say the kinds of stuff that I said, they were often shocked. And it was out of that a group of us wrote the Beyond Same-Sex Marriage statement, which was really to say, you'll do whatever you're going to do individually. But the question of privileging marriage is a very different kind of question than the individual choice that you might or might not make. And so let us frame the question differently so that you understand that whatever your personal decision might be, the question of marriage is about the state and power and recognition of a certain form of relationships against all others. And therefore you need to think about it differently, even if you personally want it. That shifted the dialogue profoundly. It took a number of us a while to get to that point of realizing we had to write something like that so that people really understood it. But I actually think people don't have a background of coming to any kind of social justice work with a history of radicalism at all. And so there's no idea that there might be a different way of thinking about it than being normal as what you're fighting for. And so I think part of why I think vision is so important and why I think it's so important for us to go out and talk about things like this is precisely because people have no place to hear it if we don't. You know, at best they're coming through cultural studies or they're coming through gender studies. I mean, that's the good news. You know, if they're coming from the sciences, you know what I'm saying? They haven't even got a framework that might have shifted or expanded their thinking. So that's why when I started, I said that this was really an honor and a value to me, because I think that these are the kind of places where we really need to engage in this kind of conversations. We need to take this conversation everywhere.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Online at beyondsamesexmarriage.org.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry. So
As a burned out activist.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some strategies that you have used or like for infusing joy back into your activism or like back in what you do? Like I see that joy and that hope is pretty closely aligned.
You know, I actually think activists are often really hard on ourselves in the way that we have a set of values that I can only think of kind of an example, but it's always been interesting to me that activists can never actually like loosen up a little bit and like buy a nice pair of sheets for their bed, you know, because somehow you're becoming bourgeois. That we don't actually, we're hard on each other with the values that are embedded in activism, and it's often, it's hard to have joy when you basically feel as though, you know, you've taken a vow of silence or, you know, a vow of poverty, and you have to live a certain way, otherwise you're selling out. Now, I don't mean everybody should go, like, you know, buy a house or something. Well, I mean, you can buy a house, be my guest. But, you know, what I'm saying is that I think we're not good at figuring out pleasure in a more consistent way in our lives. We don't know ourselves when to take a break. We don't know how to take a vacation. We don't know how to decide whether something like some nice sheets or some towels that we didn't get at the thrift store is what we really need to feel when we get up in the morning and take a shower, like it's nice to take a shower. I mean, we don't think about joy as a practical thing, and so we don't have much of it. And our meetings are often mean, and frankly, the movement eats its own. You know, I mean, I think we don't talk about it enough. That we do not treat each other with the kind of respect that I think we should, even with difference. And so we make it very hard to stay in because it is painful often to stay active. The hours are long, the pay is bad. The end results are hard to find. And so I actually think we don't do enough talking about burnout. We don't help each other think about how to be strategic so that we can stay engaged. And we don't think about activism as something that we could generate in different ways at different points in our lives. So we kind of often have a model of activism that's one thing. And when we don't want to do that anymore, or we can't do it anymore, then there's nothing else. And I think it's not a movement conversation that says that pleasure matters. So sexuality is a really good reflection of that, but other ways of actually building community for ourselves and each other is not something that we normally talk about. And because we don't, people really, really, really work enormously hard and then feel as though nobody even sees what they do. And that's hard to stay in when you feel like it doesn't even matter to anybody. So I have a very different personal life than I have a political life, for example. My partner once said to me, I feel about meetings like you feel about the gym. She's right. So I don't go home and talk about it. You know what I mean? I go home and we share a kind of deep set of values. I go home, I tell her what I've done, you know, I rant and rave for 20 minutes, and then I have a life with her. And it's not about us having gone to the same meeting. And I don't mean that that's a bad thing. I just mean, for me, it's been really important to differentiate my personal life and my friendship circle from the political work I do. I've often had lovers that were never in the movement. They were working class stone butch women that weren't comfortable in movement events, and we went to the bars. And we had a life in the bars. You know what I mean? And it actually, I think, helped keep me in, because I had a place to go that was my own. And in those conversations, it was a very different conversation about kind of what your life was like and what it was based on. And I think we should talk about it more.